They thought he was just a grieving kid in over his head, just another name on a foreclosure list. But the moment Lucas walked into that courtroom, alone, leaning on crutches but refusing to use them, it was clear something was about to change. The air was thick with quiet contempt, and still, no one asked why a 19-year-old boy was standing there by himself, facing down an entire legal team with nothing but a folder in his hand. They didn't see strength. They saw a target. Lucas didn't blink. He didn't smile. He didn't shift under the stares from the HOA board members who had once hugged him at his parents' funeral. Now they sat across the aisle smirking, arms folded like they were about to enjoy a show they'd already decided the ending to. But the ending wasn't theirs to write. The courtroom buzzed with low murmurs. The HOA had come in full force, suits, attorneys, stacks of legal briefs, and that familiar smugness of people who believed the law bent for them. And for a long time, it had. They had broken families with it, buried neighbors in debt, stolen homes behind polite smiles and typed violations, and they thought they would do it again today. Lucas stood at the defense table, the courtroom lights sharp against his pale face. The polished wood of the table towered over him, almost symbolic in how small they thought he was. But there was something steady in his eyes, something quiet, a slow-burning fire they hadn't noticed, or had simply ignored. They were about to regret that. It hadn't been long since Lucas lost his parents. A rainy night. A dinner filled with laughter. A missed turn, headlights, brakes, screaming metal. It all happened too fast. The kind of accident they said no one could have survived, but he had. And the price was everything. He had barely left the hospital before the violations began. The HOA moved the fence line like it was an accident. Then came the notices, chipped paint, an unauthorized ramp, one they knew he needed. The fines came next, small at first, then more, stacking, unpayable, and soon they added court costs to the pile. They weren't just enforcing rules. They were waiting. Watching, letting the grief hollow him out, betting he wouldn't have the strength to fight. But Lucas wasn't going to fold. He just needed time. Time they gave him because they thought he was harmless. The HOA's attorney, Garrett, Caldwell, adjusted his suit with theatrical confidence. He didn't just think he'd win. He thought this trial was beneath him. He didn't even hide it. He tapped his pen on the table like a man bored with success, like he had someplace better to be. "I have a tea time at 2, he muttered. That's what Lucas was worth to them, less than a round of golf. Garrett stood, smoothing out the front of his jacket. "Let's not waste the court's time," he said. "Mr. Dawson has clearly violated the rules. There's no legal precedent to save him." He paused then. Waited. Like he expected Lucas to panic, flinch, beg. But Lucas just watched him, still and quiet. Garrett listed the charges like he was reading a weather report. Unauthorized construction, trespassing, failure to pay fines. He stacked them like bricks, assuming each one would break the boy standing across from him. But Lucas didn't break. He remembered what his father once told him at the kitchen table, during one of those long conversations about legal cases and courtroom tricks. Don't let them see your fear. Let them see your patience. That's what they're not ready for. Lucas had listened. Every night since the accident, while the world around him collapsed, he had studied, memorized, dug through case law, zoning rules, survey records, not to play smart, not to impress anyone, but because no one else was coming to save him, When the judge asked if his lawyer was present, Lucas lifted his chin. "I'll be representing myself, Your Honor." And just like that, the smirks returned. Laughter echoed from the HOA's table. A teenager representing himself against a team of seasoned litigators? "This is going to be fun," Garrett sneered, but Lucas wasn't there to entertain them. He took his crutches and stepped forward, each click against the tile floor like a metronome counting down something they couldn't yet see coming. The gay sound echoed through the courtroom. It was the sound of defiance, of someone used to being doubted, and it was the sound of someone about to win. "Just to confirm," Lucas said, locking eyes with Garrett, "your entire argument hinges on the HOA investigator having personally witnessed the alleged property violation?" Garrett barely looked up from his files. "Obviously," he muttered. "It's in the report." Lucas let the silence simmer for a second. Then, with the control of someone who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his mind, he said the words that changed the air in the courtroom. "Your Honor, I move to dismiss that testimony as evidence." The room froze. Even Judge Reeves blinked in surprise. "On what grounds?" he asked, his tone curious but cautious. Lucas adjusted his stance. The weight on his crutches didn't seem like a burden anymore. It felt deliberate, anchored, powerful. "Because," Lucas said, voice steady, "the HOA's investigator never saw me on the property in question. In fact, he wasn't even present that day. That section of the report is a fabrication." Gasps. "Real ones. Not dramatized for a courtroom show, but instinctive, visceral." One of the board members whispered something harshly to another. Garrett's confident posture shifted, just slightly, but Lucas saw it. He wasn't finished. He turned and walked toward the evidence table, his movement slow, purposeful, his voice gaining weight with every word. "I've reviewed the HOA's official report," Lucas continued, "and I've matched it against time-stamped security footage, public records, and even the HOA's own internal emails, obtained legally through the discovery process. The investigator claimed to be on site on March 14th at 2:37 p.m. At that exact time, he was across town. According to traffic camera logs, he was leaving a private business park 12 miles away. Lucas placed the evidence on the table. Documents, photos, timestamps. The room had gone quiet. Too quiet. Garrett shifted again, but this time with something that looked very close to uncertainty. "That's circumstantial," he offered weakly. Lucas didn't blink. "Then let's keep going." He turned back to the judge. "The property line?" "Your Honor, I have an independent land survey conducted by a certified engineer. It shows the original boundary. The HOA moved the markers without approval or notification. Their new line steals 26 inches of my property." Another stack of papers. Another silence. Lucas didn't stop. "I also have a copy of the original HOA agreement signed by my parents. Nowhere in that document does it grant the HOA unilateral authority to alter property lines without owner consent." Garrett's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "Furthermore," Lucas said, calm, cold, precise, "these supposed violations the HOA fined me for. The wheelchair ramp, the fence, paint, the landscaping. Not only are those fabricated, but they all began after my parents died. I have 14 years of HOA correspondence showing that none of these items were ever cited as issues before their passing. Lucas didn't just want to win this. He wanted them exposed. He reached for the final document. And lastly, he paused. Let the room breathe. This is an internal HOA email sent 2 weeks after my parents' funeral. It reads, and I quote, "The Dawson kid can't fight this. He doesn't have the money. Keep the pressure on until he sells." Judge Reeves leaned forward. For the first time, his neutrality cracked. His hands tightened around the bench, knuckles paling. Garrett leapt to his feet. "Objection!" Lucas turned slowly, meeting his gaze. "Objection to what, Mr. Caldwell? Your own client's words?" The judge held up a hand. Objection overruled, and that was it. The line had been crossed. What had started as a petty violation dispute was now something much darker: fraud, harassment, and deliberate exploitation of a grieving, disabled teenager. The judge looked down at the email again, jaw tense, then up at Garrett. "Are you prepared to dispute the authenticity of this email, Mr. Caldwell?" Another beat, the longest second in the room. Garrett didn't answer, and that silence, that one hesitation, was enough. The tension snapped. Whispers erupted across the courtroom. One of the jurors leaned to the side, whispering sharply. Reporters in the back began scribbling furiously. On the HOA bench, board members turned toward Garrett, pale-faced and livid. One leaned over and whispered with teeth clenched, "Fix this. Do something. Now." But Garrett didn't move. Because there was no fixing this. Lucas had dismantled their case, piece by piece. He hadn't come to argue. He had come to expose. "Your Honor," Lucas said calmly, "I move for dismissal of all HOA claims based on fraudulent evidence and harassment." Judge Reeves remained still for a moment. Then slowly, like a man waking up to the smell of something burning, he exhaled and shook his head. Motion granted. The courtroom exploded, not in noise, but in energy. Silent chaos. The kind where looks meant everything. Garrett stood frozen, pale. The board president, Mr. Holloway, wiped sweat from his temple with a trembling hand. The HOA treasurer fumbled through papers like she was looking for an escape clause, but it was over. Garrett shot to his feet in a last-ditch effort. "Your Honor, this is irrelevant speculation. This defendant is twisting facts." The judge didn't let him finish. Overruled. And just like that, done. Lucas didn't gloat. He didn't raise his fists. He didn't smile. He just stood, still, steady, the storm around him finally quiet. Across the room, his grandmother Margaret let out a breath she'd been holding for months. Her hands trembled in her lap. Beside her, I tightened my grip around her fingers, unable to take my eyes off our grandson. That was no longer a boy standing there. That was a man who had gone to war and returned victorious. He turned and looked at us for the first time. And that was all we needed. Margaret was already moving, rushing up the aisle toward him. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't wait for the judge to adjourn. She reached Lucas and wrapped her arms around him with the kind of love only a grandmother can give. No words, just trembling shoulders, a full circle of grief and pride. I stood slowly. My knees ached from age, but I made my way forward. I placed my hand on Lucas's shoulder and said the only thing I could. "Your father would be proud." That was when I saw it, the crack in his composure, the smallest glint in his eyes. His throat bobbed as he tried to swallow it down, but this time, he let it come. Just a little. That single tear held more weight than any victory speech. Outside, reporters had already gathered. Flashbulbs, microphones, shouts, A tidal wave of noise. "Lucas, how does it feel to beat the HOA? What's next for you? Are you going to pursue legal action against them?" He didn't answer. He pulled, his hoodie over his head, not to hide, but to disengage. He hadn't done this for attention, not for fame, not for revenge. This was never about proving he was smarter than them. It was about survival, justice, legacy, and now, it was about what came next. Across the street, Judge Reeves stood beside his car watching. There was something different about him now. He didn't look like a figure of power anymore. He looked like a man who had just witnessed something that shook him, something he wouldn't forget. And then he did something unexpected. He crossed the street. "Mr. Dawson," he called out, voice sharp but sincere. Lucas paused, turned slightly. The judge looked at him, not as a defendant, but as a peer, as someone with gravity. "You should consider law school." Lucas tilted his head. A smile barely touched his lips. "I don't just want to study law, Your Honor," he said softly. "I want to change it." And that's when it really landed. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning. Lucas had won a war, but now he knew the battlefield. He had been underestimated, mocked, bullied, but he'd dismantled a system designed to crush him. And now that he had survived it, he couldn't walk away from it, because there were others who didn't know the law, who didn't know they could fight, who didn't have a father that taught them the cracks in the system, or a grandmother that held them through grief, or a courtroom victory that proved the world could be bent back into shape. Lucas Dawson would walk into another courtroom one day, but next time he wouldn't be fighting alone. He'd be defending the voiceless. He'd be writing the law, not just reading it. And the HOA? They'd be the first of many to learn a brutal truth. Some battles are won in silence, but revolutions, they start exactly like this. No one told the neighborhood what happened in that courtroom. No official announcement, no breaking news bulletin. But by sundown, everyone knew. The story spread like fire, faster than any HOA newsletter ever had. 1 minute, it was whispers, behind hedges. The next, it was full-blown confessionals shared over fences and text threads. "Did you hear about Lucas? They lost. The whole board lost. He didn't even have a lawyer, but what really shook them wasn't that. He won. It was how he won. He didn't scream. He didn't beg. He didn't even raise his voice. He just told the truth and let it burn everything down." By morning, the same neighbors who once left sympathy casseroles on his porch were looking away when he passed. The same ones who'd stood silent while the HOA came for him now scrambled to make sure their own violations were in order. And the ones who had once called themselves his parents' friends, they disappeared. Because guilt doesn't knock on your door. It hides behind curtains. Lucas didn't care. Not anymore. After the verdict, we thought, he might finally rest, take a breath, sleep past 3 a.m. But something inside him had changed. This wasn't peace. This was ignition. He didn't smile when the ruling was read. He didn't celebrate. He sat still, like a storm waiting for its next sky to strike. 3 days later, he called a meeting. At first, no one believed it. That same kid, the one they ignored, underestimated, calling a meeting of homeowners, but the flyer was real. Taped to every mailbox, pinned to every bulletin board in the community center. Community Oversight Meeting, hosted by Lucas Dawson. "Everyone welcome, even the ones who weren't before." I'll never forget the look on Margaret's face when she read it. "He's not letting it go," she whispered. He's going to tear the whole thing down, isn't he? No, I said, pride swelling in my chest. He's going to rebuild it. That night I drove him to the community center. The parking lot was already full. Cars lined down both sides of the street. Word had spread far beyond the HOA lines. People from other neighborhoods had shown up, even reporters, even someone from the mayor's office, trying to blend in like they weren't taking mental notes on every second. Inside, Lucas sat in a chair at the front of the room. No podium, no microphone, just a folding chair and a stack of papers on his lap. His crutches leaned beside him like they had in court, present but not used. People filled the chairs slowly. Some stood along the back wall, arms crossed. Some were curious, some ashamed, and some just angry they had to show up to hear from. A kid they'd once dismissed, and yet they came. He didn't raise his voice when he began to speak. He didn't have to. "I'm not here to rub anything in your faces," Lucas said, his voice calm, even. "I'm not here to tear down the HOA. I'm here because this neighborhood, this community forgot what it means to be human." The silence was complete. We built a system that rewards silence and punishes decency, that praises order over empathy, that pretends to care about families, but only when the lawns are mowed and the shutters are beige. My parents gave everything to live here. And when they died, all I got was a list of fines, a stolen fence line, and an email saying I couldn't fight back. He paused, and no one said a word. A few people shifted in their seats. A woman near the front looked down at her hands. An older man cleared his throat but said nothing. Lucas continued. "You want to be angry at the board? Go ahead. But the truth is they didn't act alone. They counted on your silence, on your compliance. They built their power on your inaction. You gave it to them." He held up a document. "This is a petition to dissolve the current HOA board, not because I hate them, but because they betrayed the community they were supposed to serve, and because you deserve better." A beat passed, then two, and then movement. A woman stood up and walked forward. She took the pen, signed her name, then another. A father with 2 kids flanking his side. Then a retired couple. And then it was a line. Dozens. Then more. They didn't say anything when they signed. They didn't have to. Because this wasn't about Lucas anymore. This was about all the people who had been too afraid to speak up when they were fined for leaving toys on the lawn, when their HOA fees were raised without warning, when they were denied permission to build a ramp for their mother or paint their porch a color that meant something to them. This was about power, and what happens when one person says, "No more." By the end of the night, Lucas had every signature he needed. He didn't thank them, not right away. He just looked at the paper, nodded once, and said, "Let's build something better." Afterward, when the crowd had cleared and the cameras stopped rolling, I sat with him on the bench outside the center. The autumn air was sharp, quiet. He stared at the sidewalk like it was talking back to him. "Did you think it would feel different?" I asked. "I thought winning would fix things," he said after a while. "But it doesn't. It just reveals them." "You're not done, are you?" He shook his head. "Not even close." And that's when I knew. The courtroom wasn't the peak. It was the spark. Over the next few weeks, Lucas became a name in the legal community. Not because he made headlines, but because he made waves. A retired judge reached out, offering to mentor him. A civil rights firm sent him a scholarship application. And a nonprofit that specialized in legal aid for low-income families asked him to speak at a fundraiser. He said yes to all of it. But he said yes for one reason only. Because he remembered what it felt like to sit at his dining table at midnight, reading law books with no one to help. Because he remembered what it felt like to hear someone say, "You can't fight this." And because he knew that there were thousands more just like him, grieving, disabled, isolated, ignored, facing the same machinery that tried to crush him. Lucas didn't want to be famous. He wanted to be useful. The old HOA board was dissolved officially 32 days after the courtroom victory. A new interim committee was formed. Diverse, empathetic, transparent. The community began to shift. Lawsuits were filed. The HOA's prior fines were audited. Some homes were restored to their rightful owners. And the new board? They implemented Lucas's first proposal. Any policy affecting accessibility must be approved by a council of residents with disabilities. Change wasn't just happening, it was policy now. And Lucas? He didn't stop. He started teaching a free legal literacy course at the library every Saturday. He brought donuts, handed out folders, and taught people how to read contracts, challenge unfair fees, and understand the fine print they were never meant to understand. He called the group the silent majority because he knew that most people don't want power. They just want to stop being afraid of it. I watched all of it. Watched him build something that would outlast the injustice he faced. But there was one moment I'll never forget. One evening, after a meeting, a woman walked up to him. Older, fragile, voice barely a whisper. "My daughter, she lost her house last year. Same board, same tricks. We couldn't fight back. We didn't know how." Lucas didn't say anything for a second. Then he looked at her, really looked at her, and said, "You still can." And just like that, she believed him. Because when someone who had every reason to give up decides to stand, the rest of us can't help but rise too. It was a Tuesday afternoon, quiet, cloudy, the kind of day when nothing's supposed to happen. But grief has a strange way of folding time. It doesn't wait for clear skies. It creeps in during moments like this, when the dust has settled. But the ache hasn't. Lucas was sitting alone on the old swing set behind the elementary school, the one his dad had helped build during a community fundraiser 10 years ago. The metal frame was rusted now. One chain creaked with every slow sway. He wasn't swinging, just sitting, letting the air press against him, holding something in. That's when I saw him, not Lucas. Garrett Caldwell, the lawyer, the one who had smirked through court like Lucas was a speed bump on his road to lunch, the one who had twisted the rules to try to crush a kid for daring to defend his home. He was walking up the gravel path toward the swings, wearing a hoodie and jeans that didn't quite fit his carefully manicured image. His posture had changed, shoulders hunched, gaze low. Not the man we'd seen in the courtroom, not anymore. I stepped forward from the side of the park, instinct kicking in, but Lucas raised a hand, subtle, firm. He wanted this. Garrett stopped, about 10 feet away. "I heard you come here sometimes," he said, voice hoarse, unsure. "Didn't think you'd want to see me, but—" Lucas didn't move. He didn't answer, so Garrett just kept talking. "I lost my practice," he muttered. "The firm let me go, said I was too much of a liability now. Not just the case, the emails. They're under investigation. The board's claiming I knew the whole plan, that I was part of it from day one." His voice cracked slightly. "I wasn't." Lucas's eyes narrowed, not in anger, in disbelief. "I wasn't," Garrett repeated, stepping forward. "I knew they were shady, sure, but I didn't know about the plan to take your house. I didn't write that email. Lucas tilted his head. You enforced it? Garrett froze. You stood there, Lucas continued, voice low, controlled, and read lies into the record. You didn't need the email. You saw what they were doing. Garrett's shoulders slumped. Lucas looked away. I didn't come here to forgive you, he said. I came here to remember what people do when they think no one's watching. You're not the first. You won't be the last. Garrett opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. Instead, he sat down on the bench across from the swing set. His hands shook. His eyes scanned the dirt like he was hoping to find some redemption buried in it. After a long silence, he finally said, They said you'd be easy. A scared kid. I believed them. Lucas nodded once. They always do. Garrett stood slowly. You destroyed me in that courtroom. Lucas's voice didn't waver. No, you destroyed yourself. I just read the fine print out loud. And that was it. Garrett didn't beg, didn't apologize. He just walked away. I don't know if that conversation gave him peace. I doubt it. But I know this. It gave Lucas something. Because some battles aren't about revenge. They're about making sure your enemy knows exactly who they underestimated. That night, Lucas sat with me and Margaret at the kitchen table. No papers, no books, just tea and silence. After a while, he spoke. Do you think I'm doing too much? Margaret reached over, her hands soft but steady. I think you were born for more than survival. And Lucas, he finally smiled. Just a little. The next day, he mailed off 3 law school applications, but that wasn't the biggest decision he made. That came later. 2 weeks after the confrontation in the park, Lucas stood on the edge of a small gravel lot outside town, an abandoned building, once a real estate office, now empty, forgotten. But where others saw vacancy, Lucas saw potential. This is where we start, he said. I didn't understand at first. Start what? He turned to me. A legal aid center, free, no appointments, walk-ins welcome. Anyone who gets a violation, or a summons or a threat from a landlord, they come here. He named it the Dawson Center. Not for himself, for his parents. We spent the next 4 months gutting the place. Volunteers showed up in waves, some from the neighborhood, some from miles away. People who had been watching, waiting, hoping someone like Lucas would lead. We painted the walls warm colors. We built ramps instead of stairs. We added couches, coffee machines, shelves of legal handbooks, all donated. It didn't look like a lawyer's office. It looked like a home, and that was the point. Lucas didn't want people to feel small when they walked through that door. He wanted them to feel seen. The center opened quietly. No ribbon cutting, no speeches. Just a handwritten sign on the window. You are not alone. Come in. And they did. Single mothers, veterans, renters, homeowners, the elderly, the undocumented. People who had been stepped on for years and finally found a place where someone didn't just listen, but fought back. Lucas handled every case himself at first. He wasn't a lawyer yet. But he had learned how to write appeals, challenge citations, navigate bureaucracy. He taught classes every Saturday, and he never charged a dime. Word spread. The local news ran a feature. A podcast picked up the story. A small documentary team showed up and filmed for 3 days. They asked Lucas, on camera, why here? Why now? He didn't blink. Because I survived the system once, he said, and that means I can help someone else do it too. They asked, don't you want to move on? Move up? Lucas's answer was quiet, heavy. There's no up when people are still trapped below. Margaret cried when she saw the clip. Not because he was famous, because he finally sounded free. And then, one day, someone unexpected walked through the door. Mrs. Langford, former HOA treasurer. One of the smug faces from the courtroom. One of the people who turned on Lucas when his parents died. She looked smaller now, not physically, just dimmed. She held a thick folder in her arms and didn't look him in the eye. "I'm not here for help," she said quickly. "I know I don't deserve that." Lucas waited. She placed the folder on the desk. "It's everything. Internal memos, emails, records, stuff the investigators didn't get." Lucas looked at it, then at her. "Why now?" Her voice cracked. "Because I should have spoken up. I saw it happening, and I let them convince me it was normal. That it was just business." She paused. "But then I saw what you did, and I realized if a kid could risk everything to tell the truth, what was I doing still hiding?" Lucas opened the folder. "I can't undo what I did," she whispered. "But maybe I can help you stop it from happening again." And just like that, she turned, walked out. Lucas didn't chase her. He just added the file to the growing pile of evidence that would become his next mission, filing a class action lawsuit on behalf of every homeowner the HOA had wronged. Because this wasn't just about him anymore. It never had been. It was about people like the woman who lost her daughter's house, the father who couldn't afford legal fees, the kid watching from the sidelines thinking no one ever wins against power. Lucas was building a movement. Not loud, not flashy, but steady, unbreakable. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't just believe in justice again. I believed in the next generation to carry it forward. It started with a phone call. Unlisted number. Crisp voice. Too polished to trust. "Mr. Dawson," the man said. "I represent a coalition of national housing and neighborhood management associations. We'd like to speak with you." Lucas didn't respond right away. He didn't recognize the name. But he knew the tone, the corporate calm, the practiced charm designed to disarm. "We've seen what you're doing at the Dawson Center. Your story has inspired a lot of conversation, at the highest levels. What you've built has potential. Real scale." Lucas leaned back in his chair, one hand still resting on a thick manila folder. He'd just spent 3 hours helping a retired bus driver fight an eviction notice over an unpaid HOA fee from 2008. "What do you want?" he asked. A soft laugh from the other end of the line. "We want to help. Support your work. Imagine. Dawson centers in every state. Fully staffed, fully funded, legally protected. No more donations. No more scrambling for resources. You could lead it all. Be the face of something nationwide." And there it was. The offer. The dream. The hook. "We just ask for a few small compromises," the voice added gently. "Operationally, philosophically. Legal partnerships with neighborhood associations to maintain balance." Balance. Lucas knew that word. He'd heard it before, in the mouths of the HOA lawyers, in the justifications used to punish disabled homeowners, in the policies that claimed to preserve community values by suppressing anything that looked different. He ended the call without a word, but the offers didn't stop. Emails, visits. Check delivered to the center in an envelope with no return address. 6 zeros. Margaret opened it by accident. "What are they trying to buy, Lucas?" she asked, trembling. "Your silence?" "No," he said quietly. "My face. My name on their brochure." The pressure came next. Zoning requests suddenly denied. local. Officials quietly pulling their support, donors drying up without explanation. Lucas had seen this before. This was the same playbook the HOA used, just scaled up. But this time, the stakes were different. This time, people were watching, waiting to see what he'd do. One night, after everyone had left the center, Lucas sat alone in his office, lights off. Just the soft hum of the heater and the weight of 100 choices pressing down on his chest. He pulled out the check again, looked at it. Not for the money, for the cost. With that money, he could open 5 more centers, hire staff, buy computers, file cases faster. But at what point does a movement become a brand? And when does justice start looking like compromise? His phone buzzed. A text from Judge Reeves. "Are you still fighting, Mr. Dawson?" Lucas stared at the message, then typed back, "Always." The next morning, Lucas made a decision. He called a press conference. No suits, no flags. Just folding chairs under the old oak tree beside the center. People came. Reporters, activists, opponents. He stood in front of them wearing jeans and a hoodie. No notes, no podium, just truth. "I've been offered money," he said. "Fame. Leadership positions. A platform." He let that settle. But none of that stopped someone from losing their home because of a code they never knew they violated. None of that helps a veteran read a lease he can't afford a lawyer to interpret. None of that replaces what the system steals from people when they're told, "You don't belong here." He held up the check. "They offered me this." A murmur moved through the crowd. "I'm giving it back." He tore it in half. Then, again, "Let the pieces scatter in the wind. I don't want to lead a movement that forgets who it's for. I don't want a bigger stage. I want a better system." And then he stepped down, not from the fight, from the spotlight. He passed leadership of the center to 3 women who had been volunteering since day one, a paralegal, a single mom, and a retired school administrator. He kept helping with cases, kept teaching classes, but he no longer let himself be the face, because symbols can be bought. But the work? The real work? That had to stay human. Still, the system didn't forget him. A month later, Lucas was invited to speak at a national legal conference in D.C. He didn't want to go. "I don't belong in rooms like that," he said. "You do now," I told him. So we went. I flew with him. Margaret packed his bag. She put a letter from his father in the inside pocket. A note he wrote years ago after Lucas had won a middle school debate tournament. It said, "You see what others miss. Use that for good." The conference was a blur. Marble halls, polished smiles, lanyards and logos and catered luncheons. Lucas didn't smile much. He watched. He listened. And when it was his turn to speak, he didn't preach. He told a story. Not of victory, of silence, of the months after his parents died when no one knocked. When neighbors disappeared. When he waited every night for someone, anyone, to say, "You're not alone." And then he said, "I won my case. But I shouldn't have had to. The fact that I did, alone, is proof the system is failing." He paused, then dropped the line that would go viral the next morning. Justice shouldn't require genius. It should require access. Standing ovation, even from the judges. But Lucas didn't stay for the dinner afterward. He left. He walked alone that night. Through the streets of D.C., past courthouses, law firms, embassies, and he realized something. The system wasn't scared of lawsuits. It was scared of light. Because what Lucas had done, what he was still doing, was shine. When we got home, there was a note taped to the Dawson Center door. No name, just one sentence, handwritten in shaky cursive. Because of you, I stayed. No signature. Lucas read it 3 times. Then he folded it and taped it beside his desk, next to the ripped check, next to his father's letter. That night I asked him, "Do you ever wish none of this had happened? That you could go back?" Lucas looked at me, and for the first time I saw him hesitate. "Every day," he said. "I'd give anything to have my parents back, to just be a kid again, to not have to know what I know. But," he added, softer now, "if I can't go back, I'd rather move forward with purpose than stand still with regret." Then he looked out the window, toward the quiet street, the quiet homes, the quiet scars no one talks about. "They tried to break me," he said. "Instead, they woke me up." We thought it was over, the courtroom victory, the movement, the momentum. We thought once the check was ripped, once the system was exposed, that the people who tried to destroy Lucas would finally disappear. But evil doesn't go quietly. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it watches. And sometimes it reloads. The letter arrived on a Friday. Thick envelope, no return address, hand-delivered to the Dawson Center, left in the mailbox by someone who didn't want to be seen. Lucas opened it without hesitation. Inside, a summons filed by Victor Holloway, the former president of the HOA. He was suing Lucas for defamation, reputational damage, and malicious intent. $10 million. $10 million. Margaret's breath caught in her throat when she read the number. "Is this a joke?" But Lucas didn't laugh, because this wasn't about money. It was revenge. It was fear, weaponized. Victor Holloway had vanished after the scandal, lost his position, lost his company, quietly stepped away from the public eye while Lucas's name rose in national conversations. He'd become a punchline on the HOA reform circuit, but he hadn't forgotten, and now he wanted everything back by destroying the one person who had taken it from him. I expected Lucas to rage, to pace, to prepare like he did before. But this time, he didn't. He sat in silence, the papers resting on the table. Then he whispered, "He wants a war." Margaret touched his hand gently. "So fight him, like you always do." But Lucas shook his head. "Not like this." Because this time he wasn't just protecting a home. He was protecting a message, a movement, a center full of people who believed they were no longer invisible. And a lawsuit like this, it didn't just threaten him, it threatened the belief that truth could win. Because even if he beat the case, the damage would linger. Doubt would bloom, headlines would shift, and the very people Lucas had worked to protect might start asking, what if he did lie? What if he went too far? That was the danger of being seen. Your truth always came with shadows. He called a meeting with his team, the volunteers, the new board, a few local lawyers who had started, helping pro bono. "We have 3 choices," he said, calm but firm. "We fight this in court and draw it out for months, maybe years. We countersue, or we do something else." "What's something else?" someone asked. Lucas stood and walked to the whiteboard, wrote one word, truth. The plan didn't make sense at first. Instead of a legal counterattack, Lucas proposed something different. A town hall, a public recorded no-questions-barred confrontation between himself and Victor Holloway. Broadcast live. "Invite him," Lucas said. "Let him speak." "But why?" someone protested. "He's dangerous." Lucas nodded. "And people need to see how dangerous looks when it's unmasked. It was risky. Holloway could lie, could smear, could turn the narrative into something venomous. But Lucas wasn't interested in silencing him. He wanted him to speak, because Lucas knew what Victor didn't. The truth doesn't need armor when it's already survived fire. The invitation went out the next day. To everyone, neighbors, officials, reporters, HOA survivors from surrounding communities, even former board members. Victor accepted. The event was scheduled in the same community center where Lucas had first rebuilt the board, where the people once signed their names to stand behind him. It was standing room only. Victor arrived late. He walked in like a man who'd been waiting for this moment. Slick gray suit, polished shoes, smile like a blade. He took the chair opposite Lucas at the front of the room. 2 microphones, 1 table, 1 long silence. Then Lucas spoke. "You said I defamed you." Victor leaned in. "You did. You destroyed my life." "No," Lucas said, his voice calm. "You destroyed it yourself. I just stopped letting you do the same to others." Victor scoffed. "Is that what you tell yourself? That you're a hero? You're a kid who got lucky? A courtroom fluke? A media puppet?" There it was. The venom. The desperation. Lucas let it sit. "I was 19, he said softly. Disabled. Orphaned. Alone. And your board tried to take my home through deception, intimidation, and lies." He pulled out the email. The one that changed everything. "This is your board's handwriting. This is your signature on the approvals. And this," he held up the timeline, "is the sequence of actions that proves you weren't just aware. You let it." Victor said nothing. Lucas turned to the audience. "But here's what matters more than evidence. It's what silence cost." And then he did something no one expected. He invited 3 people to the front, an elderly couple, a young mother, a veteran in a wheelchair. Each of them told their story. Fines they didn't understand. Letters they couldn't read. Penalties that took their savings. And how, after Lucas won, they finally had the courage to fight. When they finished, Lucas looked Victor in the eye. "You sued me because I embarrassed you," he said. "But the truth is, you weren't ruined by my voice. You were ruined by your own silence, your own greed, your own inability to see that power unchecked always folds." Victor leaned forward, but his expression had changed. Less smug, more shaken. "You think people care about your truth, kid? The world doesn't run on justice. It runs on fear, money, control. You think your little speeches change that?" Lucas held his gaze. "No, but they shine light on it, and that's how darkness loses." The room was dead still. Victor opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Because, in that moment, the room saw what Lucas saw. A man unraveling, not from defeat, from being exposed. Victor left before the Q&A. No words. Just footsteps fading down the hall. Lucas never responded to the lawsuit again. He didn't have to. 2 weeks later, it was quietly withdrawn. No settlement, no admission. Just gone. The legal equivalent of walking away from a battlefield after realizing no one followed you. We sat on the porch that evening, watching the last leaves fall. Margaret was humming an old hymn. Lucas sat beside her, sipping tea. He looked tired, but not broken. "That was the hardest thing I've ever done," he said. "Harder than court?" I asked. He nodded. "Because court was about proving I was right. This was about proving he was wrong without destroying him. I understood then. Lucas hadn't won by outsmarting his enemy. He'd won by refusing to become him. Because power doesn't just corrupt the wicked, it tempts the righteous. And Lucas? He chose restraint. He chose light. He chose to let Victor crumble in full view, not because he wanted to see him suffer, but because he wanted others to see what corruption looks like when truth stands beside it and does not flinch. That night, the Dawson Center received another anonymous note. It said, "Not all monsters hide in shadows. Some hide in rules. Thank you for teaching us how to see them." Lucas folded it, placed it on the wall, right next to the last one. The hardest part of change isn't the enemy. It's the people who say they're on your side, until the moment it costs them something. Lucas had learned to spot a lie from across a courtroom. He'd faced down lawyers, presidents, enforcers, and managed to survive them all. But nothing prepared him for the betrayal that came from within the very walls he'd built. It started small. A missing file, a delayed intake, a tenant who showed up with a fine notice 3 days after it had been handled. At first, Lucas thought it was burnout. The Dawson Center was growing too fast. Volunteers became staff. Classes expanded. The Saturday legal clinics were booked months in advance. Donations were flowing in, but so were expectations. Then came the complaint. An anonymous tip filed with the city clerk's office, alleging mismanagement of funds, misuse of legal forms, unlawful practice by an unlicensed individual. Lucas. The audit was launched the next morning. Lucas sat with his head in his hands as 2 city officials arrived at the center, polite but stiff, holding clipboards and plastic smiles. "This is procedural," one of them said, "but we'll need full access. All financial records, all intake files, all communications." He nodded, cooperated, because when you live by transparency, you don't fear light. But somewhere beneath the calm, we knew. This wasn't random. Someone was trying to crack the foundation from inside. 3 days into the audit, Lucas got the name. It came from an unlikely place, a former city employee who had quietly admired Lucas since the court case. She'd seen the file, recognized the signature on the complaint, and when she texted him the name, Lucas didn't move for a full 10 minutes, because it wasn't an opponent. It was Alma Wells, one of his first allies, one of the 3 women Lucas had appointed to lead the center after stepping back. A woman who had hugged him the day they opened, who told the press, "This kid is going to change everything." She was the one who filed the complaint. The betrayal didn't feel like a stab. It felt like silence, heavy, shaking, wordless. He didn't call her right away. He waited, watched. She didn't confess. She showed up to every meeting, smiled, took notes. She was building something behind his back, and she wasn't hiding. That was when he realized something cruel. She thought she was doing the right thing. That night, Lucas sat on our porch, knees bouncing, hands clenched. "I trusted her," he said, voice sharp. "I gave her power because I believed she wanted justice." Margaret sat beside him quietly, offering warmth but not answers. "And maybe she does," Lucas muttered, "but only the kind she controls." We didn't respond, because sometimes letting someone speak their grief is the only comfort you can give. The next morning, Lucas asked Alma to meet him at the center, alone. She arrived on time, not nervous, not smug, just calm, like she'd been rehearsing the moment for weeks. He didn't ask her to explain. She spoke first. "You started something beautiful, Lucas," she said, "but it can't stay yours forever." Lucas blinked. "It was never mine to keep." Alma stepped closer, folding her arms. You stepped back, remember? You gave us the keys. We've been doing the work, expanding it, securing the funding, and now that it's growing, we need it to be safe, sustainable. Lucas stared at her. By accusing me of fraud? Her face faltered, only slightly. It wasn't personal. That's the problem, he said. It should have been. He stepped forward, voice steady. You didn't just challenge my role. You tried to erase it. You used the same system we're fighting to come after me. I protected the mission, she said. Lucas's voice cracked. By lying? She looked away. And in that moment, the room changed. Not in volume, in weight. Because Lucas didn't see an enemy anymore. He saw what the system does to good people when power tastes familiar. Alma whispered, You're brilliant, Lucas, but you scare them. The city, the funders, you don't play nice. You don't compromise. They don't want a warrior. They want a director. He said nothing. I was just trying to keep the lights on. Lucas looked at her. And what he said next didn't come from anger. It came from pain. You didn't save the center, Alma. You just turned it into the very thing we swore we'd never become. He left the room. She didn't follow. The audit ended 2 weeks later. No evidence of fraud, no misuse of funds, no violations. Clean. Lucas didn't celebrate. He just drafted a letter. He resigned from the Dawson Center Board the next day. Not in defeat, in integrity. Because if the center was going to become something political, something hollow, it wasn't going to be under his name. Not anymore. Margaret cried when she read the letter. You built this, she whispered. You bled for it. I built it to serve people, Lucas said. Not politics, not donors, and definitely not people who believe power is safer than truth. That night, he packed up his desk, left behind the notes, the plaques, the photographs. Took only 3 things: his father's letter, the anonymous note that said, because of you, I stayed, and a binder full of open cases he hadn't finished yet. The community was shocked, some angry, some confused, most heartbroken. But Lucas didn't hold a press conference. He didn't throw anyone under the bus. He just left and started again. Not with a building, with a table. In the back of the library downtown, Lucas set up a folding table. On Tuesday afternoons, a sign in front. Free help. No judgment, no politics, just justice. The line stretched down the hall every week. No fancy office, no big name, just Lucas. And the law. I watched him work sometimes. Watched the way he listened. The way he asked questions no one else had time for. The way he explained legalese in plain language with patience even the best lawyers rarely showed. People didn't come because he had power. They came because he gave it back. He didn't need an organization to be effective. He just needed a reason. And as long as injustice existed, he had one. One night as we drove home, I asked him, "Do you ever wish you had played it safe?" Lucas stared out the window, thought for a long time, then said, "Safe doesn't save anyone." He turned to me. "I don't want to be a symbol, Grandpa. I want to be a spark." That's when I knew. Lucas wasn't slowing down. He was shedding the parts of the system that couldn't follow him into the future, because for some people, justice is a job. For Lucas Dawson, it's a calling. It began like the others. A woman in her late 60s, soft-spoken, neat sweater, paperwork clutched to her chest like it might disappear if she blinked. Her voice trembled as she approached Lucas's table at the library. "They're trying to evict me," she said. "I've lived in the house since 1983. My husband passed last year. He was sick a long time." Lucas nodded, quietly ushering her to sit. She unfolded a letter. It was from Heritage Heights Association. An HOA, of course. She had been fined 6 separate times in the last 5 months. The grass grew over city code height once during chemo treatments. Her mailbox paint was deemed non-compliant. A bird feeder, hung for her late husband who loved cardinals, was labeled a potential pest hazard. Lucas flipped through the pages, each fine more absurd than the last, each one growing, compounding, tied to administrative fees, interest, legal filing threats. Lucas stopped at the last page. "They've filed to foreclose on your home," he said softly. The woman blinked, and a single tear slid down her cheek. "I didn't even know they could do that." Lucas looked at the letterhead again. Heritage Heights. He knew that name, not from a file, from a photograph. Years ago, his father had kept an old folder labeled unfinished. Inside, clipped together with a red rubber band, were documents from a case Franklin Dawson never got to finish. A friend of his, a woman in a neighboring city. Her HOA was trying to take her home. That HOA, Heritage Heights. Lucas remembered his father pacing the kitchen, whispering to his mother, "It's the same thing, always the same thing. Target the weak. Push them until they break, then pretend the law makes it fair." He hadn't known what it meant back then, but he did now. That woman had lost her case, died a year later, alone, unrepresented. Lucas never forgot the look in his father's eyes the day he got the letter. "I couldn't save her," Franklin had said. "One day someone will." Now Lucas was looking at that day, and that someone was him. He stood from the library table, gathered the papers, and told the woman, "I'm going to fight this. We're not going to let them do this to you." He didn't wait. By nightfall, he had every legal document printed, signed, submitted, filed a request for injunctive relief, secured a pro bono co-counsel, sent formal notice to Heritage Heights and their legal team. Within 48 hours, the hearing was scheduled. This time, Lucas wasn't defending himself. He was defending her, but in that courtroom, something shifted. He wasn't the kid with crutches anymore. He was standing at the plaintiff's table in a tailored suit, spine straight, voice measured. He wasn't just proving a case, he was proving a promise. To her, to his father, to everyone who had ever walked into a courtroom feeling already forgotten. And then, across the aisle, he saw him, the HOA's lead counsel. Older man, tall, sharp-edged, clearly experienced, and when he spoke, "I wasn't expecting to see another Dawson in court." Lucas turned. "You knew my father?" The man's expression flickered. He was relentless, honest, a pain in my side for a decade. Lucas didn't blink. "Good." The man smiled, thin, cold. "We buried your father's case. We'll bury this one too." Lucas took a breath, and then softly, "You didn't bury anything. You just delayed the verdict." That exchange never made it into the transcripts, but it changed everything. Because Lucas wasn't fighting with emotion now, he was fighting with precision. He dismantled their violations one by one. A city inspector's report that contradicted the HOA's claim, photographs time-stamped during hospital visits, testimonies from neighbors affirming the woman had asked for leniency and was denied. Then he brought out the email, not hers, his father's. A memo Franklin Dawson had sent, to a legal watchdog group, warning about Heritage Heights' pattern of abuse. It had gone unanswered, but now it was evidence. Lucas turned to the judge. "This isn't just about one home," he said. "This is a playbook, a predatory structure designed to target the vulnerable under the disguise of order." He held up the stack of fines. "This isn't about paint color or grass height. It's about power, unchecked, unchallenged." And then his voice dropped. "My father tried to stop it, and I'm finishing what he started." The courtroom was silent. Even the opposing counsel didn't move, because something had shifted. Lucas wasn't pleading. He wasn't pushing. He was leading. The judge leaned forward. "Read the email." Read it again, and said softly, "Case dismissed. Foreclosure halted." Then louder. "And I recommend this HOA be reviewed by the Attorney General for potential pattern-based elder abuse." The gavel struck, but this time, the sound didn't mark an end. It marked a beginning. Lucas stepped outside the courthouse into the sunlight. The woman followed slowly behind, her face awash in disbelief. "I thought it was over," she whispered. "It was," Lucas said. "For them." She reached out and held his hand. "You're not like your father," she said. Lucas smiled faintly. "No, but I think I'm finally standing where he meant to go." A reporter ran up, microphone out. "Mr. Dawson, can you comment on today's ruling?" He paused, looked at the courthouse behind him, at the woman beside him, at the sky above. Then he turned to the reporter. "Tell them this. Justice isn't a moment. It's a decision we make every single day, in rooms no one sees, for people no one hears." Then he walked away. No speech, no headline grab, just the sound of footsteps, moving forward. Months later, the Dawson Center reopened under a new name. No boards. No egos, just rotating volunteers and clear rules. No one profits, everyone helps. Lucas didn't run it, but he visited. Sometimes to help, sometimes just to listen. One afternoon, I found him sitting under the tree out back, flipping through his father's old legal notebook. Margaret joined us. She brought lemonade. He looked up. "Do you think he'd be proud?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer with words. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out something I'd been holding for years. An envelope, sealed, yellowed by time. His father's handwriting on the front. For Lucas. When he's ready. Lucas opened it slowly. Inside, a single note, written in his father's hand. "You won't change the world by being louder. You'll change it by being unshakable." Lucas read it once, then again. Then he folded it and tucked it in his breast pocket, close to his heart. And for the first time, he didn't look like the boy who had fought to save a house. He looked like the man who was about to change the country, because the war wasn't over. The system wasn't fixed. But Lucas Dawson? He was still standing, still watching, still unshakable. And if the world had any sense at all, it would start listening.